Maurice was so put together. Like, he was very, debonair and suave. Knew how to speak, knew how to smile, knew how to stay reserved. My mom called me, and she said, "Your Uncle Maurice was killed." And I said, "What?"
We entered the residence at that point, and both of us could smell an odor of decay.
I started shining my flashlight around in the room, and that's when I seen blood.
She's developed this fixation with him.
It was kind of like we came into each other's lives at that time for a reason.
She thought because of her age and the way she looked that we wouldn't have suspected.
She just lied and lied and lied.
The dream wasn't going to come to fruition. She wanted payback.
Guthrie, Oklahoma is just over 32 miles north of the state capital of Oklahoma City.
You don't really hear about a lot of violent crime in a place like Guthrie. It's like a lot of towns in Oklahoma, more of a kind of smaller, tight-knit community.
On the afternoon of Saturday, December 10th, 2011, officers on patrol with the Guthrie Police Department receive a request for a welfare check on 60-year-old resident Maurice Byrd.
Maurice used to live across from the police department, and I used to, every now and then, go out there and say, "Hey, what's up, Maurice?" Dispatch calls and says that Maurice's ex-wife wants to talk to me on the telephone. Dispatch passed me through to her, and she said that Maurice was supposed to be in Kansas City with the rest of his family to make some decisions about his mother. She said something's wrong because Maurice was supposed to be in here last night. She said he wouldn't miss this. I go to the house, knock on the door, nobody answering the door. So I walked completely around the house, didn't really see anything, and I went back around, knocked on the door again.
He tried the doorknob, which the front door was unlocked. At that point, Officer Williams, he called me and asked for my assistance so we can go check this residence. So we went to the front door, opened it up, announced ourselves that we were the Guthrie Police Department.
They get no reply.
We entered the residence at that point, and both of us could smell an odor of decay. We went through the kitchen, and there was a chair that was knocked over. I observed some droplets of blood that was there on the floor.
The officers cautiously follow a trail of blood to the bedroom.
I took my flashlight, started shining my flashlight around in the room, and that's when I seen Maurice Byrd laying on the floor on the left side of the bed, and I could see blood. It was obvious he was deceased.
I could see that he had been deceased for a little while just due to the discoloration in his skin, and also notice a pool of blood under the side of his head.
The officers can't tell how Maurice died, but there are enough red flags to call it suspicious.
You have one chair that's overturned, and then a little bit of blood splatter that's on the ground, and then Maurice is found by the bed. It appeared that there was a little bit of a struggle.
I stepped back outside of the residence and made contact with my chief of police at the time. He said, "Go ahead and call our investigations unit," and OSBI was also notified.
I couldn't think of a reason why somebody would do anything to Maurice, because as far as I knew, he was a good dude. He was a good guy. It was kind of puzzling.
Frances Maurice Byrd was born in 1951 and raised in Kansas.
We had a really big family, and my grandma and her sister raised us like within blocks of each other. Granny had a house on the corner, and Aunt Wanda had a house down the street. And my Uncle Maurice was Aunt Wanda's son. We were all always at the other's house. And, you know, no knocks on doors, in and out, you know. Everybody knew everybody's business, obviously. And, you know, we just all loved each other.
Like the rest of his family, Maurice graduated from Independence High School, and then he went on to pursue a degree in business, which he obtained in college.
Maurice was so put together. Like, he was very, like, debonair and suave and, like, attractive and, like, smooth. Very professional, very eloquent, knew how to speak, knew how to smile, knew how to stay reserved. He wasn't, like, confrontational or aggressive, but he was very commanding of his space.
In 1976, Maurice got married and started a family.
He and his wife went on to have 2 beautiful children and basically the American dream, a nice home, a nice family, everything that he really could have asked for. Maurice was a building contractor. He was good at what he did, and he was committed to doing the best job that he could.
After the kids left home and over 35 years of marriage, Maurice and his wife divorced.
He was still very involved in his family's lives, his siblings, his kids. He even kept up a relationship with his ex-wife. He was really looking for a fresh start and a place that he could really thrive with his real estate company, commercial and residential. And Guthrie was seen as a place that was still on the up and up, still with room to grow.
At this time in his life, he moved to Guthrie as kind of a restart.
He was very active in the community. He was a counselor for at-risk youth and the director of a nonprofit organization in the community.
He wanted to give back. He was gonna open some houses for at-risk people trying to transition back into society. He wasn't judgmental. He knew that we all had a past and that we can either take our past and use it as building blocks and become successes, or we could be stuck in our past. And he was all about giving people second chances. As suave as he was, as debonair as he was, as successful as he was, the most important thing was getting these people off the streets and giving people a chance to do better.
But Maurice will never see his dream come true. He lies dead in his bedroom in a pool of blood. Agents with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation arrive at his Guthrie home.
When we entered the bedroom, we could tell that Mr. Byrd had been shot. We didn't find any casings, and there was not a gun there. That pretty much gives you a good indicator that wasn't suicide, that someone had killed him.
Someone shot him 4 times in the back. Whoever did this wanted to make sure he was dead.
First and foremost, there weren't any signs of forced entry to the residence. And that can tell you a couple of things. One is that Maurice had opened the door and maybe somebody had surprised him. However, there was no signs of struggle at the doorway. There was no marks on the door, meaning that it didn't appear that entry was made forcibly into the residence. So the possibility emerged that Maurice knew the killer.
Does that mean they were friends? Does that mean that you open the door and somebody's got a gun in your face?
The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation is in Guthrie, where 60-year-old Maurice Byrd has been found inside his home with 4 gunshot wounds to the back.
There wasn't any forced entry to the house. It didn't show that it was a burglary. We didn't discover anything from the residence that was stolen.
There is one possible exception.
We knew that Maurice had a vehicle, but no vehicle was currently at the residence. So initially it was thought that whoever had killed Maurice had actually taken his car as well.
Inside, investigators try to piece together what happened.
You could see a turned over chair in the kitchen, and we could see a drop of blood.
Investigators theorize Maurice was first shot in the kitchen.
It appeared that he ran away and he was shot again in the bedroom and was found face down.
That's where you start to think, was he trying to seek safety? Was he trying to get to a weapon of his own? His handgun was next to the bed inside a drawer. And you start to think that maybe he was trying to get something to defend himself with.
There wasn't any shell casings. Sometimes that could indicate that someone picked them up. It could also indicate that it was a revolver versus a handgun, a semi-automatic.
There is something else in the bedroom that stands out.
Processing the bedroom where Mr. Byrd's body was, there were several gift cards that was laying on the dresser.
The cards are worth thousands of dollars.
There's nothing criminal about it. It just seems strange.
Investigators contact Maurice's family.
In this case, everyone was out of state, and exigency actually required us to notify at least one of the family members first via telephone. Somewhat uncommon, but we needed to get that out there and see what it is that the family knew. So the first call was to Maurice's ex-wife. Although suspecting something bad, of course, it was still shocking to her to learn that Maurice had passed, especially that it wasn't natural causes.
I just can't imagine anybody having anything bad to say about him.
Well, the first thing you'd want to do is figure out who's the last person that contacted him.
She begins to establish a timeline. She hadn't spoken to him since around the 5th or the 6th.
In calls to his brother and daughter, they say the same thing.
No one has actually spoken with him after the 6th, so about 5 days since he was located.
Then we shifted into a mode of walking around to the neighbors, asking them if they heard any gunshots. When was the last time they'd seen Maurice? Everybody that I spoke to had not seen him within a 2-day period.
Between December 7th and December 10th is probably when he was murdered, because they didn't hear from him from that time period.
Detectives learned that Maurice's car was not stolen.
Neighbor number 2 that I spoke with, he had known quite a bit, but the last time that he had talked with Maurice was a few weeks earlier, just before Thanksgiving. He said that Maurice had a gray sedan, and it was currently being worked on by a mechanic.
We would also be looking at who has surveillance video and go from that point.
It was learned that there was a camera that was on a church that actually was just to the south of this property, and it got a good portion of the street out in front of Maurice's house.
Knowing that Maurice's car has been in the shop for weeks, detectives look to see if any other vehicles have been to his house in the days since his family last heard from him.
Now, there was one timestamp that the police found interesting. It was marked for December 7th at 7:18 p.m.
And on that camera footage, you see a sedan, medium to light colored, pull up, and out comes a lady. She goes into the house, spends a certain amount of time in there, comes out of the house and leaves in the sedan.
A white elderly woman with white hair got out and went inside. She was inside for about 5 minutes, and then she gets back into her car and drives away.
Her visit comes after Maurice's family and neighbors last heard from him. Whoever she is, she could be the key to solving the case.
They need to talk to her because there's questions. Did you know something? Were you just coming to visit Maurice? Did you see something?
Investigators in Guthrie, Oklahoma, are reviewing surveillance footage that shows an elderly woman in a gold sedan entering the home of Maurice Byrd after he was last heard from by family and neighbors.
You couldn't really identify the person that got out of the car that walked to the house because it's dark.
Investigators keep watching. 20 minutes after her first visit, a second camera picks up the vehicle again.
Both cameras are picking up this same gold sedan, which seems to be going back and forth in the neighborhood. It just seems strange.
That vehicle had been circling around that house a couple of times.
Eventually, she parks, this time in an alley adjacent to the church.
Again, you see this same gold sedan on this footage, and you see the same elderly white woman with white hair get out and go into Maurice's home. But this time, she doesn't leave for an hour.
Investigators move quickly to try and identify the woman.
You can't see the license plate, and you can't really identify the person in it. It just looks like an older lady.
That information was forwarded to me to be able to determine the type of vehicle. And we were able to determine the make and model of that car, even a year range.
Police turn to the residents of Guthrie for help.
At this point, the police have done all they can, and they're gonna need help from the media. Journalists have the ability to reach out to communities, to gather responses and trust in a way that sometimes police can't do. We put the information out there in hopes that someone will be able to recognize the vehicle, recognize the woman in the footage.
But days pass without any leads.
No one was able to identify her, and it was almost like she was just a ghost.
On December 17th, 2011, 10 days after Maurice's murder, Guthrie police receive a phone call from one of his family members. According to the relative, something upsetting occurred at Maurice's funeral earlier that day.
The family gets to the funeral. You know, they're in the process of mourning Maurice, spending time with their loved ones, and this woman shows up. And instead of, asking the family if there's anything that she can do for them, expressing her condolences, she's asking for money that she believes Maurice owes her.
She makes a request to the family and says, Maurice owes me money. And it wasn't just $5, $20. It was $20,000. And she starts asking questions about when his estate was going to be divvied up and just all kinds of inappropriate questions.
She literally started going into how Uncle Maurice owed her money and that she had belongings in his apartment that belonged to her, and she wanted those things. And she wanted to see about any insurance or anything because she was owed.
The family member goes on to say that the woman isn't a stranger. She is 65-year-old Beverly McComb.
She actually used to date Maurice's cousin, so they had seen her around before, but Maurice's cousin had since passed away.
We didn't really get along, but her and my dad weren't together for very long.
So for her to be here requesting money at a funeral, what relationship do you now have with Maurice that entitled you to come and ask something like this? It was weird, so the family said, you know what, we're calling the police.
Mrs. McComb was asking for money, wanting the family members, that was his children, to pay back some money that he owed her. Well, that's obviously very suspicious.
Investigators immediately take a look at Beverly McComb.
Investigators look into her vehicle to see what she owns, and what they find is that she's the owner of a gold sedan, the same gold sedan that was seen at the church surveillance footage.
Investigators also learned that Beverly lives 250 miles away in Forney, Texas.
On December 20th, OSBI, in cooperation with the Texas Rangers, applied for a warrant to search this woman's home in Forney, Texas.
At the same time, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agents travel to Forney to question Beverly.
You know, this is a 65-year-old woman, quiet home in the suburbs. What is the link? What is the reason that she would have to travel from Texas to Oklahoma? How were Maurice Byrd and Beverly McComb connected?
This is about Maurice Byrd. And do you know Maurice?
Agents with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation are in Forney, Texas, questioning 65-year-old Beverly McComb about the shooting death of Guthrie resident Maurice Byrd.
So police started interviewing Beverly, and she was very calm in her demeanor. She was compliant, answering questions.
All right. How do you know Maurice?
I went with his cousin, like I said, back in '87. I met him then, and then just over the years, we were around each other.
Okay. Who's Maurice's cousin?
Tommy Anderson, and he's deceased. That's how I reconnected with Maurice.
Her relationship with his cousin didn't go well, and they broke up. And then when they broke up and she kind of never really found anybody to be with, then she went online trying to see if she could find Tommy, and then discovered that Tommy had passed away. So then she reached out to Maurice and then was able to reconnect with him.
Beverly felt an instant connection and a closeness to Maurice because he was related to Tommy.
So what type of relationship did you and Maurice end up having? Were you guys boyfriend, girlfriend?
No. We were very good friends. He had the philosophy that that things are kind of, predestined. He was very spiritual.
Beverly says that Maurice inspired her to make a fresh start in Guthrie, just as he had done after his divorce.
He was gonna help me move. I was trying to find a job.
She shared her problems with Maurice, and he shared his with her.
He said that, he kind of told me beforehand about how he was kind of living sparsely, I guess you would say. And he said that someone that owed him money hadn't paid him. I thought, well, I've still got some. Maybe, I could get a little bit of money to help him.
Did you get cash and give it to him out of that, or did you transfer it?
I transferred it. I got, it's like some kind of a money card.
When we were processing the crime scene in the bedroom, I remember seeing some gift cards laying on the dresser. That was how she was paying him money.
If you had to guess at a total dollar amount that you gave him over the past 3 months.
I think it came out to $17,000 and something.
She stated that she had given Maurice $17,000 to $20,000 over a span of 3 months.
But Beverly insists she was okay with that.
Was he using you?
I don't think so.
Don't think so?
No. He fully intended to pay me back.
Beverly admits to investigators she was in the Guthrie area the week Maurice was killed.
When was the last time you saw him?
Oh, I think it was a few days before this happened.
Before he died?
Mm-hmm.
But investigators tell Beverly they know exactly which day she was there.
Okay. There's several cameras on this building.
Okay.
With different views.
They present Beverly with footage that shows her entering Maurice's home the first time on December 7th.
And that's the day he died.
That day?
Did you ever see him again after that?
No.
But investigators tell her the footage shows her going back 20 minutes later.
You went back to the house that night. Tell me what happened when you went back to the house that night.
So now she has no choice but to reveal, yes, I was there.
Beverly offers an explanation.
She tells them a story of Maurice encouraging her to, obtain a gun to protect herself. She's an elderly woman living alone, and that, according to her, Maurice took her to get the gun. She tells investigators that she went with Maurice to a shooting range, but they know she's lying.
The worst thing that you can do is lie to me.
They press Beverly for the truth, but they are unprepared for what she says next.
You didn't go there with the intent to kill him, did you?
I didn't go by myself.
Then slowly, with hesitation, admitted that somebody else was with her that night.
Presented with surveillance footage, Beverly McComb admits she did return to Maurice Byrd's home on the afternoon he was shot and killed. But Beverly says she didn't go alone.
Who is he?
I don't know his last name.
What's his
terrible.
first name?
Max.
Is he your boyfriend?
He's just someone that I had met
How did you meet him?
in Guthrie.
She seen him walking down the street and just decided to pick him up. They went to a motel and they had sex.
And then they had a rendezvous at the hotel for several days.
During their tryst, Beverly confided in Max about the money she'd loaned Maurice.
And he's a nice person. And he felt sorry for me, but I mean, he felt more like that I'd been, taken advantage of.
Mac.
On December 7th, she says they went to Maurice's home together. They took her gun, at Max's suggestion.
He thought that we should take it in, and I tried to talk him out of it.
To scare him?
Yeah. Then Maurice opened the door, and I started in, and then Max came behind me and came in. And then he and Max, they were hollering back and forth at each other, and I went in to use the bathroom. And it seemed like that it was escalating.
While she was in the bathroom listening to the conflict, she heard Maurice say, "Oh, you've got your gun. I've got mine too." And that's when she heard the gunshots go off.
And after that, she's so scared and terrified that she runs out of the house.
Beverly told police that when they left the home, Max left on foot and she left in her vehicle, which is why you wouldn't see him get in her vehicle on the surveillance camera.
Okay, I mean, you're being honest with me about that. Is he the one that shot Maurice? Or did you do it?
No, I didn't.
Okay, Max did. And you're being 100% honest with me.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I have to check all of this out.
She doesn't know his last name, but she does have his phone number written down on a piece of paper at her house.
Beverly tells them they will find the gun there as well.
He gave you the gun back?
Yeah.
Where's it at your house?
It's on a shelf in my closet.
Then Beverly puts a sudden end to the questioning.
Maybe I do need a representative.
At Beverly's house, the search is already underway.
Police found a piece of paper with Max's number on it.
They also find the gun, just where Beverly said it would be.
Police find a .38 revolver in her house.
And, it's the same type of gun that was used in Maurice's murder, and the number of bullets missing matched the amount of shots to Maurice's body.
So at this point, she has said that Max has shot Maurice, and police are now at the point where they have to do their due diligence.
They trace the phone number and come up with a name Guthrie police are familiar with.
Max was just a guy that everybody knew that, just hung around town and did what he did. And I found Max at one of the stores here in town and told him I need you to come to the police department.
Oklahoma investigators have picked up the man Beverly McComb claims shot and killed Maurice Byrd at his home. Guthrie police question him.
They present Beverly's name to him and says, hey, tell me about your relationship with this woman. Max goes on to say that what Beverly said was an embellishment of the truth. That Max was walking down the street one day, confronted by an older woman who was asking basically for sexual relations. Max agreed. They went back to her motel. They did what they did, but that was the extent of the relationship.
Max explained that he was not guilty and he had nothing to do with Maurice's murder.
Max offers an alibi.
He was at a convenience store at the time of the murder.
So I went to the store, pulled the video, and there's Max on video cashing the check. So at that point, we knew Max didn't do anything.
That only left one person, Beverly McComb.
On December 22nd, 2011, police arrested Beverly in her Texas home for the murder of Maurice Byrd.
Beverly maintains her innocence. In early 2013, prosecutors prepare for trial. They believe Beverly developed strong feelings for Maurice after they started talking online.
It's almost as if she's developed this fixation, this obsession with him.
But the tides turned when she loaned him thousands of dollars.
Apparently, he wasn't paying it back quick enough for what she liked.
She decided to take matters in her own hands. She purchased a gun, drove from Texas to Guthrie.
Prosecutors say that Beverly approached Maurice at his home demanding he pay her back the $20,000 in loans. Either he refused or he didn't have it, but he gave her an answer she didn't like.
They're arguing and he's not giving her money back, and she just got angrier and angrier. Beverly was just hurt. She wanted revenge. She was angry. So she shot Mr. Byrd and killed him.
When Beverly realized that the dream that she believed that she saw in Maurice wasn't going to come to fruition, it wouldn't come into reality, she got angry and she wanted payback.
Facing life in prison, Beverly starts having second thoughts.
Now, in March 2013, Beverly's attorney files a motion to change her plea in order to strike a deal where if she admits guilt, she'll be given a more lenient sentence. The judge ultimately sentences her to 40 years in prison with 30 years suspended as long as she maintains good behavior.
Maurice's family is outraged.
Is it a deal just for women, or is it a deal just for white people? What kind of deal is it? And can we call it what it is? It's just not right.
She didn't even serve the full 10 years before being released. You know, we have cases in Oklahoma of people who were sentenced to life in prison for simply being at the scene of a crime when they were 18, sometimes 17 years old. And you have this elderly white woman who thinks about what she's going to do. It's a premeditated act. She goes and murders someone, lies to police about it.
December 26, 1996. The morning after Christmas should have smelled of cinnamon, pine needles, and wrapping paper scattered across a quiet family home. Instead, inside a large brick house on 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado, a different kind of silence settled over the rooms. It was the kind of silence that arrives just before a life is split forever into two parts, before and after. Outside, the neighborhood still wore the peaceful disguise of the holiday season. Frost clung to the lawns. Bare tree branches stood motionless against the pale winter sky. Christmas lights blinked lazily from nearby homes, their cheerful colors refusing to acknowledge that only a few walls away, one of America's greatest criminal mysteries had already begun. A mother descended a staircase expecting to begin another ordinary holiday morning. Instead, her eye stopped on several sheets of paper lying on the wooden steps. At first glance, they looked almost harmless, as though someone had left behind a grocery list or forgotten Christmas instructions. But as her eyes moved across the words, every ordinary sound disappeared. Her breathing changed. Her hands trembled. The message claimed that her 6-year-old daughter had been kidnapped. It demanded $118,000. It warned that any mistake would cost the little girl her life. Within minutes, panic replaced routine. A telephone call was placed to emergency services. A child's name echoed through the house. JonBenét. The little girl was nowhere to be found. What happened over the following hours would become one of the most dissected criminal investigations in modern American history. Detectives, forensic experts, journalists, profilers, television hosts, authors, and millions of ordinary people would spend decades trying to answer the same haunting question. No matter how many theories emerged, no matter how many documentaries were produced, no matter how many books claimed to reveal the truth, the answer remained painfully out of reach. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? It sounds like the beginning of a fictional thriller. A wealthy family. A luxurious home. A ransom note longer than most letters. A child beauty queen. A missing little girl. Then, before the day was over, a body discovered inside the very house where everyone believed the kidnapper had taken her from. Yet nothing about this story belongs to fiction. Every strange detail happened in real life. Every contradiction still exists. Every unanswered question continues to cast a shadow over a crime committed nearly 3 decades ago. Imagine walking into a house where almost every object seems to whisper a different version of the truth. A staircase that carried a ransom note. A kitchen where someone may have paused for a late-night snack. A basement room hidden behind an ordinary wooden door. A length of cord. A broken paintbrush. Torn pieces of tape. A flashlight. Christmas decorations still standing proudly as though nothing terrible could ever happen beneath their glow. Each object became more than evidence. Each became a character in a mystery. Investigators would study handwriting until individual pen strokes became battlegrounds. They would examine footprints, fibers, fingerprints, DNA, phone records, family relationships, broken windows, basement doors, and even the exact wording of Hollywood movie dialogue that appeared strangely echoed inside the ransom note. Every discovery seemed to answer one question while creating 3 more. Some believed the killer entered from outside. Others insisted the truth never left the house. Neither side has ever managed to silence the other. That is what makes this case so unsettling. Most murder investigations slowly narrow toward certainty. Witnesses speak. Physical evidence accumulates. A timeline solidifies. Eventually, the fog lifts enough for investigators to point toward one person with confidence. This investigation moved differently. The deeper detectives looked, the more the picture fractured. Every clue seemed capable of supporting completely opposite conclusions. A ransom note suggested kidnapping. A body hidden inside the home suggested something entirely different. No obvious sign of forced entry pointed toward the family. Unknown male DNA pointed away from them. The crime scene raised questions. The investigation itself raised even more. Even today, experienced homicide investigators disagree over what happened inside that house during the final hours of Christmas night. Perhaps that is why the case has never truly disappeared. It returns every few years with renewed intensity. Advances in forensic science inspire hope. Newly released documents revive forgotten debates. Interviews are analyzed frame by frame. Old photographs are enlarged again. Amateur investigators compare timelines late into the night. Online communities revisit evidence boxes that have already been opened 1,000 times, convinced that one overlooked detail could finally unlock the truth. But the center of the story has never changed. At its heart was not a headline, not a television sensation, not a courtroom battle. It was a 6-year-old child whose future ended before sunrise. That reality can sometimes become blurred beneath decades of speculation. People remember the beauty pageants. They remember the photographs. They remember the headlines screaming about million-dollar theories. Far fewer remember the ordinary moments that disappeared forever. The toys left untouched. The bedroom waiting for someone who would never return. The unopened possibilities of an entire lifetime. Behind every famous mystery is an ordinary family routine interrupted without warning. The Ramsey home had celebrated Christmas like countless other families across America. Gifts had been exchanged. Smiles had been photographed. Plans had been made for the following day. Nothing in those festive hours openly announced that history was quietly approaching the front door. Somewhere between celebration and sunrise, something happened. Whether it lasted minutes or hours remains disputed. Whether one person or more than one person was involved remains disputed. Whether the ransom note was part of the original crime or part of an elaborate deception remains disputed. Nearly everything is disputed. Except one fact. A little girl died violently inside her own home. From that single certainty grew one of the most complicated investigations ever witnessed in the United States. As dawn slowly spread across Boulder, police officers entered a house they believed might be the scene of a kidnapping. Few could have imagined that before the afternoon ended, they would instead be standing inside a homicide investigation already tangled by confusion, emotion, and irreversible mistakes. The decisions made during those first hours would be examined for decades. Some would be criticized. Others defended. All of them would become part of a puzzle that still refuses to fit together. The story you are about to hear is not simply the story of an unsolved murder. It is the story of uncertainty itself. It is a story where evidence competes with interpretation, where public opinion often moved faster than forensic science, where television cameras sometimes seemed only a few steps behind police investigators. And where one tragic death transformed into a cultural obsession that has never fully faded. Some mysteries become colder with time. This one never truly did. Because every answer discovered seemed to uncover another question waiting beneath it, like layers of ice covering darker water below. Nearly 30 years later, investigators still preserve evidence. Experts still debate laboratory results. Journalists still revisit forgotten interviews. Families, detectives, and strangers alike continue searching for the same missing piece that has eluded everyone since that frozen Colorado morning. Somewhere within the thousands of pages of investigative files, the countless photographs, the laboratory reports, and the memories of everyone who walked through that house lies the truth. Whether that truth will ever be fully known remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in the history of true crime. The house itself seemed almost too perfect to become the setting of a nightmare. It stood large and inviting, decorated for Christmas with wreaths, ribbons, and glowing lights that still clung stubbornly to the fading holiday season. Family photographs lined the walls inside. Wrapped gifts had only recently been opened. Children's toys rested where they had been left the night before. Nothing about the home suggested violence. Nothing hinted that its walls were about to become some of the most photographed walls in American criminal history. By the time the first police officers arrived that morning, they believed they were responding to a kidnapping. Their expectations shaped every decision made during those crucial first moments. Instead of sealing off every room as a potential homicide scene, family members moved about the house. Friends arrived to comfort the Ramseys. Ministers offered prayers. People prepared coffee. Conversations drifted through hallways where silence would later be recognized as far more valuable than reassurance. Every step carried the possibility of disturbing evidence. No one knew it yet. The ransom note dominated everyone's attention. It was unlike anything seasoned investigators had expected. Rather than a short demand written in haste, it stretched across 2.5 handwritten pages. It contained detailed instructions, dramatic warnings, and oddly theatrical language. Whoever wrote it had apparently remained inside the house long enough to locate paper and a pen belonging to the family, compose the lengthy message, and then return the writing materials to where they had been found. That single detail continues to disturb investigators decades later. Criminals who commit kidnappings generally seek speed. They want distance. They want control. Remaining inside a victim's home to write what amounted to an essay was astonishingly risky. Unless, some wondered, the writer never feared being interrupted. Or unless the letter had another purpose entirely. Questions multiplied almost immediately. Why demand exactly $118,000, an amount strikingly similar to John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus rather than an arbitrarily large ransom? Why fill the note with dramatic phrases that sounded strangely familiar to movie dialogue? Why threaten execution if police became involved when the family called emergency services almost immediately? Why kidnap a child only to leave her inside the house? Each question pointed in a different direction. Each possible answer seemed to cancel another. As investigators searched the home, the hours passed with agonizing slowness. The child had not been found. There was no phone call from an alleged kidnapper. The deadline mentioned in the ransom note came and went without contact. Anxiety thickened the atmosphere inside the residence. The waiting became unbearable. Parents measure time differently when a child is missing. Minutes stretch into hours. Ordinary sounds become unbearable interruptions. Every ring of a telephone feels like destiny. Every second without news deepens fear. Inside the Ramsey home, hope and dread existed side by side. Perhaps she had been taken. Perhaps she was still alive. Perhaps the kidnappers would call. Perhaps. The possibilities narrowed with every passing hour. Then everything changed. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, John Ramsey and a family friend were asked to look through the house again. It was a suggestion that would become one of the most scrutinized moments in the entire investigation. John descended toward the basement. The lower level was colder than the rooms above. It received little natural light, and its unfinished spaces created long shadows that swallowed corners of the room. Storage boxes, holiday decorations, and household items occupied much of the area. It was the kind of basement where people stored memories they did not need every day. Behind one particular door was a small windowless room. The room had often been described as a wine cellar, though it was used primarily for storage. John opened the door. Inside, he found his daughter. The search for a kidnapped child ended in the discovery of a homicide. In a matter of seconds, every assumption made that morning collapsed. The little girl was lying on the floor. Tape covered her mouth. A cord had been wrapped around her neck and connected to a crude ligature fashioned from part of a broken paintbrush. Her wrists showed signs of restraint. She was still dressed in the white top she had worn the previous evening. The horror of that moment has been recounted countless times, but no retelling can fully capture its emotional weight. A father who had spent the morning believing his daughter had been taken somewhere else suddenly realized she had never left the house. Instinct overwhelmed procedure. John picked her up. He carried her upstairs. He called out for help. From a human perspective, it was an understandable act of desperation. From a forensic perspective, it altered the crime scene forever. Investigators would later acknowledge that crucial evidence may have been disturbed or permanently lost during those moments. Fibers could have been transferred. Footprints affected. The original position of the body changed. Potential trace evidence compromised. But hindsight arrives with perfect clarity. Real life never does. The house that had already been imperfectly preserved as a kidnapping scene now became an even more complicated homicide scene. For detectives, the challenge had transformed beyond recognition. Instead of searching roads, airports, and neighboring states for abductors, they now faced an impossible question. If the child had never left the house, who had been inside it? The answer seemed as though it should have been simple. Yet almost immediately it became one of the most divisive questions in criminal investigative history. Some detectives quietly began looking inward. Others kept looking outward. And somewhere between those two directions, the truth disappeared into nearly 3 decades of speculation. From that afternoon onward, the Ramsey residence stopped being simply a family home. It became evidence. Every staircase, every doorway, every window latch, every carpet fiber, every fingerprint, every light switch, every discarded object acquired new significance. Investigators photographed rooms from every angle, measured distances down to fractions of an inch, and attempted to reconstruct movements that had taken place while everyone inside had supposedly been asleep. The house refused to tell its story clearly. Instead, it offered fragments. Fragments that could be assembled into completely different narratives depending on which evidence one believed deserved the greatest weight. That uncertainty would define everything that followed. It would divide experienced detectives. It would divide forensic experts. It would divide prosecutors. It would divide the public. And perhaps most tragically, it would ensure that the name JonBenét Ramsey would become forever associated not only with a terrible crime, but with one of the most enduring mysteries the modern world has ever struggled to solve. There is something uniquely unsettling about crimes that happen inside a home. We grow up believing that walls protect us, that locked doors separate danger from family, that bedtime marks the end of uncertainty until morning. A house is supposed to be the final barrier between the outside world and the people we love. When violence crosses that boundary, it leaves behind more than broken lives. It destroys one of our deepest assumptions about safety. The Ramsey case shattered that assumption in a way few crimes ever have. If an unknown intruder entered the home, then someone had managed to slip into a quiet residential neighborhood on Christmas night, remain inside for an extended period, commit an unimaginably brutal crime, and leave without being identified. If no outsider entered, then the answers had been hidden within the walls from the very beginning. Those two possibilities have stood opposite each other for decades, neither one powerful enough to erase the other completely. That tension is what transformed an investigation into a phenomenon. It was no longer only a police case. It became a national argument. Long before social media amplified every rumor, 24-hour television found in this tragedy the perfect storm of mystery, emotion, and unanswered questions. News helicopters circled the neighborhood. Satellite trucks lined quiet streets. Cameras lingered outside the Ramsey home day after day, waiting for movement behind the curtains. Every public appearance by the family was dissected. Every interview was replayed. Every hesitation, every glance, every word spoken, or left unspoken, became material for endless debate. The public searched not only for facts. They searched for certainty. Human beings are uncomfortable with unanswered questions. We naturally look for patterns. We connect unrelated details. We convince ourselves that if we stare at a puzzle long enough, the missing piece will eventually reveal itself. In the JonBenét Ramsey case, millions of people believed they had found that missing piece. Yet almost every theory relied on emphasizing certain facts while minimizing others. One expert would point toward the ransom note. Another toward the DNA. One would focus on family dynamics. Another would focus on the lack of clear forced entry. Each explanation sounded convincing until another equally persuasive explanation challenged it. The result was not clarity. It was a maze. And somewhere inside that maze was a 6-year-old child whose voice had been permanently silenced. As the years passed, the case took on a life of its own. Books promised the definitive answer. Television specials claimed to expose hidden truths. Former investigators publicly disagreed with one another. Independent experts reconstructed the crime from scratch. Internet forums filled with diagrams of the house, timelines measured down to the minute, and debates over evidence that had already been analyzed countless times. Yet despite all that attention, the central mystery remained exactly where it had been on the morning of December 26, 1996. Unresolved. That word carries enormous weight. An unsolved case does not simply wait. It changes. Memories fade. Witnesses age. Evidence becomes harder to interpret as technology evolves. Some clues gain importance. Others lose it. What once appeared insignificant may later become critical, while evidence that seemed decisive can become far less certain under newer scientific standards. The JonBenét Ramsey investigation has experienced all of those transformations. Advances in DNA testing created hope that modern science might succeed where traditional investigation had failed. At different moments, those developments appeared to point investigators in new directions, only for fresh questions to emerge about how tiny DNA samples should be interpreted, whether they reflected meaningful contact or innocent transfer, and what conclusions could responsibly be drawn from them. Science illuminated part of the path. It did not reveal the destination. Perhaps that is why this story continues to endure while so many other famous crimes slowly fade from public memory. People are not haunted only by what they know. They are haunted by what they almost know. By the feeling that the answer exists just beyond reach. Like a light visible through heavy winter fog. Close enough to imagine. Too distant to touch. Before we examine the evidence, before we explore the competing theories, before we follow investigators through years of interviews, laboratory testing, and dead ends, it is important to remember something that can easily disappear beneath the weight of speculation. This was never meant to become history. It was supposed to be an ordinary family holiday. The photographs taken that Christmas capture smiling faces, festive decorations, and the familiar warmth shared by countless families every December. No one looking at those images could have predicted that, within hours, they would become some of the most recognizable photographs ever associated with an American criminal investigation. The contrast is almost unbearable. Joy beside grief. Celebration beside violence. Childhood beside death. Those opposites define this case from beginning to end. They also remind us why it continues to resonate across generations. Not because it is sensational. Not because it inspired endless headlines. But because it confronts us with a question that remains unanswered despite decades of investigation, extraordinary public attention, and remarkable advances in forensic science. Somewhere, someone knows what happened inside that house during the final hours of Christmas night. Whether that person has remained silent out of fear, guilt, loyalty, or because the truth has simply never been uncovered is something the world still does not know. What we do know is that the path toward understanding this mystery does not begin with the crime itself. It begins with the people whose lives existed long before the headlines, before the cameras, before the theories. To understand why this case captured the world's attention, we first have to step back into Boulder in the winter of 1996, into a community that appeared peaceful on the surface, into a family preparing for the holidays. And into the brief but unforgettable life of a little girl whose name would become known around the globe for reasons no child ever should. Boulder, Colorado, in the winter of 1996 looked like the kind of place people imagined when they pictured the American dream wrapped in fresh mountain air. Resting against the dramatic backdrop of the Flatirons, the city carried an unusual balance of sophistication and tranquility. University students hurried across snowy sidewalks with backpacks slung over heavy winter coats while successful professionals drove through quiet neighborhoods lined with mature trees and elegant homes. Coffee shops buzzed with conversations about business, technology, and academics. Local bookstores displayed holiday bestsellers beside shelves filled with hiking guides and philosophy. Even in late December, the city possessed a calm confidence, as though life naturally moved at a slower, more thoughtful pace beneath the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Christmas had only just passed. Colored lights still glowed from rooftops after sunset. Artificial wreaths hung from front doors. Children snowmen leaned awkwardly in front yards where patches of melting snow revealed frozen grass underneath. Families were finishing leftovers from Christmas dinner while others packed suitcases for holiday trips before the new year. It was a season associated with warmth, generosity, and reunion. Few communities expect tragedy to arrive during Christmas. Even fewer imagine it unfolding inside one of their most recognizable neighborhoods. The Ramsey residence stood in an affluent section of Boulder, a large Victorian-style home that reflected years of financial success. From the outside, it projected stability. The house was expansive, with multiple floors, winding staircases, numerous bedrooms, and a basement that stretched beneath much of the structure. It was the kind of home where laughter from one room could easily go unheard in another. Its size created privacy, comfort, and opportunity for family life, but it also meant hidden corners, locked storage spaces, and long hallways that would later become critically important to investigators attempting to reconstruct a single night. In December, the home embraced the holiday season completely. Christmas decorations filled the rooms. Garland wrapped around stair railings. Decorative ornaments reflected soft yellow lights from nearby lamps. Wrapped gifts had occupied spaces beneath the Christmas tree only hours before. Holiday cards from friends and relatives rested on tables and shelves, reminders of connections reaching far beyond Boulder. Family photographs captured birthdays, vacations, celebrations, and milestones that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. Nothing inside those photographs hinted that history was quietly approaching. The Ramseys appeared, by most outward measures, to be living a remarkably successful life. John Ramsey had built a respected career in the technology industry. His business achievements had provided financial security that allowed the family to enjoy opportunities unavailable to many others. Colleagues often described him as disciplined, intelligent, and focused. His professional world revolved around meetings, deadlines, contracts, and strategic decisions, but at home he was also a father navigating the ordinary rhythms of family life. Patsy Ramsey brought a different energy into the household. A former beauty queen from West Virginia, she possessed a natural comfort in public settings and a strong appreciation for presentation, tradition, and celebration. Friends remembered her enthusiasm for holidays, especially Christmas, when she transformed the family home into a festive environment filled with decorations and carefully planned gatherings. She invested time into making family occasions feel memorable, believing that children often carried those moments with them for the rest of their lives. Together they represented a family that many outsiders admired. Success. Comfort. Opportunity. Yet appearances, while often truthful in part, rarely tell the complete story of any family. Like every household, the Ramseys experienced private challenges invisible to neighbors driving past their home. Years before the events of December 1996, the family had already suffered profound loss. John's eldest daughter from his previous marriage had died in a traffic accident. Grief had already touched the Ramsey family long before JonBenet's death, leaving emotional scars that would never completely disappear. Although life continued, that earlier tragedy remained part of the family's history, quietly shaping relationships in ways that outsiders could neither measure nor fully understand. Inside the home lived two young children. 9-year-old Burke Ramsey often appeared quieter than his younger sister. Family friends described him as intelligent and interested in building things, spending time with toys, games, and activities that encouraged concentration rather than attention. While JonBenet frequently stood in front of audiences beneath bright stage lights, Burke generally remained farther from public focus. Then there was JonBenet. Even before the world learned her name, people who met her often remembered the same details. Her bright smile. Her confident personality. Her remarkable comfort in front of cameras. She had become involved in children's beauty pageants, an activity encouraged and supported by her mother. Colorful dresses, polished performances, rehearsed routines, carefully styled hair, and bright stage lighting became familiar parts of her childhood. Photographs captured her wearing sparkling costumes, holding trophies almost as large as her small frame, smiling with the confidence of someone many years older. To some observers, those images represented childhood achievement. To others, they raised difficult questions about children participating in competitive beauty contests at such a young age. That debate would become much louder after her death, often overshadowing the little girl herself. Long before strangers argued about pageants on television, however, JonBenét was simply a child living her everyday life. She attended school. She played with friends. She celebrated birthdays. She laughed. She became excited about Christmas presents. She argued with her brother from time to time, as siblings often do. She experienced ordinary childhood moments that never appeared in magazine covers or television documentaries. The public would come to know her face through heavily stylized pageant photographs, but those who knew her personally often remembered something different, a lively 6-year-old whose daily life contained far more crayons, toys, and imagination than sequins and crowns. That distinction matters. Because over the years, the public image of JonBenét sometimes became larger than the child herself. The camera loved the pageant contestant. History should also remember the little girl. Christmas of 1996 had been busy for the Ramsey family. Like countless households across America, the days leading up to December 25th were filled with shopping, wrapping presents, visiting friends, and preparing for celebrations. The house reflected the joyful chaos that accompanies holiday gatherings. Gifts accumulated beneath the tree. Travel plans were discussed. Meals were prepared. Family schedules overlapped as everyone looked forward to spending time together before the new year arrived. No one could have known that investigators would later examine these ordinary holiday activities with extraordinary precision. Every stop made by the family. Every visitor. Every phone call. Every meal. Every hour. Events that would normally disappear into memory without significance suddenly became pieces of a timeline studied over and over again, as detectives searched desperately for the moment when an ordinary Christmas transformed into an unsolved homicide. At the center of that timeline stood a little girl whose life had barely begun. Before the investigation, before the evidence, before the controversy and decades of speculation, there was simply JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old child growing up in a family that, from the outside, seemed to have every reason to believe the future would be filled with more Christmas mornings. More photographs, and more memories still waiting to be made. For many families, Christmas Day follows a rhythm that barely changes from year to year. Children wake earlier than usual, too excited to sleep. Wrapping paper quickly covers the floor. Parents move between cups of coffee and cameras, trying to preserve moments that always seem to pass too quickly. Conversations drift from gifts to dinner plans, from holiday traditions to the coming year. It is a day measured not by clocks, but by memories. The Ramsey family appeared to experience much of that familiar rhythm. Christmas morning began with presents, excitement, and the laughter expected from a home with young children. The house, already filled with elaborate decorations, seemed alive with the energy that only the holidays can create. Bright ribbons lay scattered across the carpet. New toys demanded immediate attention. Boxes were opened faster than they could be cleaned away. Family photographs captured smiles that, viewed today, carry a heartbreaking weight because the people in them had no idea how dramatically their lives were about to change. As the day continued, the family prepared to visit friends for a Christmas gathering. It was not an unusual event. During the holiday season, invitations passed easily between families, especially within close social circles. Homes opened their doors. Children played together while adults shared stories, meals, and plans for the weeks ahead. Nothing about the invitation suggested that it would later become one of countless ordinary events examined by investigators searching for extraordinary answers. That evening, the Ramseys attended a Christmas dinner hosted by friends. Those who saw the family later described the gathering as pleasant and uneventful. Adults talked. Children spent time together. Food was served. The atmosphere reflected the relaxed comfort of people celebrating one of the year's most cherished holidays. There were no reports of arguments, visible distress, or unusual behavior that clearly foreshadowed what would happen only hours later. When the evening came to an end, the family returned home. It was late. Winter nights in Boulder settle quietly. Traffic becomes sparse. Cold air hangs over the streets, and neighborhoods gradually retreat into darkness as porch lights become the brightest points on otherwise silent roads. Inside many homes, children were already asleep after exhausting themselves with the excitement of Christmas Day. According to the family's account, JonBenét had fallen asleep during the drive home. Like many tired 6-year-olds after a full day of celebration, she was carried inside rather than awakened completely. The image is one familiar to countless parents, a sleeping child resting against a parent's shoulder, still dressed for the evening, unaware of the careful steps taken to avoid waking her. She was placed in bed. Good night was said. The house gradually became quiet. It is within those quiet hours that certainty begins to disappear. Investigators would spend years attempting to reconstruct what happened after the lights were turned off. Every possible movement inside the home became significant. Who remained awake the longest? Which lights were left on? Were any doors unlocked? Did anyone hear unusual sounds? Did neighbors notice anything out of the ordinary? Was someone already inside the house before the family returned? Or did someone enter later? The answers proved frustratingly elusive. Unlike crimes committed in public places where surveillance cameras, witnesses, or passing vehicles may provide fragments of a timeline, the Ramsey case unfolded almost entirely behind closed doors. The house itself became the only silent witness. And houses do not speak. They preserve traces. A footprint here. A fiber there. A misplaced object. A partially opened door. The challenge for investigators would be deciding which traces represented meaningful evidence and which belonged to ordinary family life. That distinction was never as simple as it sounded. The Ramsey home was large, lived in, and filled with the normal clutter of a family celebrating Christmas. Decorations occupied tables and shelves. Wrapping paper had recently been discarded. Guests had visited during the holiday season. Friends, relatives, and service workers had entered the home on previous occasions. Every one of those ordinary activities complicated the task of separating routine household evidence from evidence connected to a violent crime. By the time investigators recognized the full scope of the tragedy, the scene had already become even more difficult to interpret. Yet all of that lay in the future. During the late hours of Christmas night, none of those questions existed. The family believed they had reached the end of another holiday. Outside, Boulder slept beneath the cold December sky. The city streets were unusually quiet, interrupted only by the occasional passing vehicle or the distant sound of winter wind moving through bare branches. Christmas lights continued glowing from windows, creating islands of warm color against the darkness. Somewhere within that peaceful night, events unfolded that would permanently alter not only one family, but the history of American criminal investigation. The precise sequence remains unknown. That uncertainty has become one of the defining characteristics of the case. Some investigators have argued that the timeline points toward an intruder who entered the home either before or after the family's return. Others have questioned whether the available evidence supports such a scenario. The absence of a universally accepted reconstruction means that the hours between the family's arrival home and the emergency call the following morning remain among the most intensely debated periods in modern true crime history. What makes those missing hours so haunting is their silence. There are no reliable eyewitnesses describing what occurred inside the house. There is no complete recording of movements from room to room. There is no single piece of evidence capable of revealing the entire story. Instead, investigators were left to assemble fragments, hoping they would eventually form a coherent picture. But fragments are dangerous. They invite interpretation. Two people can examine the same evidence and reach entirely different conclusions without either acting in bad faith. That reality would shape this investigation from its earliest days. Long before the case became the subject of documentaries, books, and endless public debate, detectives were already confronting an uncomfortable truth. This was not a crime scene that offered straightforward answers. It resisted them. Every discovery seemed to carry at least two possible explanations. Every explanation created new questions. Even the apparent calm of Christmas night became part of the mystery. If an outsider committed the crime, how had that person moved through such a large house without waking anyone? If the events unfolded entirely within the family home without an outside intruder, what sequence could account for the evidence investigators would later recover? Those questions would echo through interview rooms, forensic laboratories, grand jury proceedings, television studios, and court filings for decades. But on the night itself, none of those debates had yet begun. The clocks continued moving toward morning. The decorations remained illuminated. The neighborhood remained peaceful. And somewhere inside the Ramsey home, the final chapter of a little girl's life was unfolding in complete darkness, leaving behind a mystery that would challenge every attempt to explain it. By sunrise on December 26th, the appearance of normal life would vanish forever, but to understand why this case became so uniquely difficult, it is important to understand the world surrounding it. Boulder in the mid-1990s was not a city accustomed to crimes that captured international headlines. It enjoyed a reputation for education, outdoor living, and relative prosperity. Residents often described it as the kind of place where neighbors recognized one another, where children rode bicycles through quiet streets, and where serious violent crime felt distant, something that happened somewhere else. That perception shaped expectations. When people believe they live in a safe community, they naturally interpret unusual events differently. A strange sound in the middle of the night is more likely to be dismissed as the wind. An unfamiliar vehicle parked down the street attracts little attention. A door left unlocked may not seem alarming. Everyday habits are built on trust, and trust can quietly influence the way both families and investigators initially respond when something unthinkable occurs. The Ramsey family occupied a visible place within that community. Their financial success, social connections, and JonBenet's participation in children's beauty pageants made them recognizable to many people beyond their immediate neighborhood. They were not anonymous residents living unnoticed behind closed doors. Friends, acquaintances, business associates, pageant organizers, photographers, teachers, and neighbors all knew the family in different ways. Visibility can be a privilege. It can also become a burden. After JonBenet's death, that visibility transformed into relentless public scrutiny. Ordinary family photographs were printed across newspapers. Home videos became national television footage. Every public appearance was examined with extraordinary intensity. A family that had once been known within its local community suddenly found itself observed by millions of strangers who believed they could determine truth from facial expressions, body language, or a single sentence spoken during an interview. The investigation unfolded under a level of public attention that few homicide cases have ever experienced. That attention created enormous pressure. Police departments work most effectively when investigators can follow evidence wherever it leads, free from constant outside judgment. In this case, however, each development was quickly reported, debated, and often interpreted long before all the facts were available. Rumors spread almost as rapidly as confirmed information. Anonymous sources fueled speculation. Headlines frequently emphasized dramatic possibilities rather than measured certainty. The result was an environment in which public opinion often formed faster than forensic conclusions. That distinction is essential. Suspicion is not proof. Speculation is not evidence. Throughout the years, countless claims have circulated about what must have happened inside the Ramsey home. Some were supported by elements of the investigation. Others relied heavily on interpretation or incomplete information. Separating established facts from theories has remained one of the greatest challenges for anyone attempting to understand the case. Even today, responsible investigators and researchers continue to distinguish carefully between what is documented and what remains uncertain. That uncertainty does not weaken the story. It is the story. Every unsolved case exists within the space between evidence and certainty. The JonBenet Ramsey investigation occupies that space more completely than almost any other modern homicide. There are physical findings that cannot be ignored, yet there is no universally accepted explanation that accounts for every one of them. There are investigative decisions that have been criticized, but there is no consensus that correcting those mistakes would necessarily have identified the killer. There are competing theories that each answer certain questions while leaving others unresolved. The deeper one studies the case, the more apparent its complexity becomes. That is why this story cannot be told responsibly as though it were a mystery with a hidden solution waiting to be dramatically revealed. Real investigations rarely unfold that way. Evidence must be weighed, contradictions acknowledged, and uncertainty respected. Some questions deserve honest answers. Others deserve the equally honest admission that, despite decades of work, no definitive answer exists. As we move forward, that distinction will remain at the center of this narrative. We will examine the documented evidence. We will follow the investigation as it developed. We will explore the principal theories that have shaped public discussion. But we will not confuse possibility with fact. Because at the center of every theory is a child who lost her life, and every unsupported certainty risks moving farther away from the truth rather than closer to it. Before detectives began collecting evidence, before laboratory reports filled thick case files, before handwriting comparisons, DNA analysis, and grand jury proceedings became part of the investigation, there was simply a little girl whose life touched the people around her in ordinary ways. She was a daughter, a sister, a classmate, a friend, and a child with dreams that reached no farther than the next holiday, the next school day, or the next adventure. Those everyday moments are easy to overlook once a person becomes known through tragedy. Yet they are often the most important part of understanding what was lost. The headlines introduced the world to JonBenét Ramsey as the victim of one of America's most infamous unsolved murders. The people who loved her knew her long before she became a headline. To them, she was not a mystery. She was family. And before we can fully understand the investigation that followed, we must first step away from the cameras, the speculation, and the courtroom debates to meet the child whose brief life became the heart of this extraordinary case. Because every true crime story begins with a crime. But the most meaningful ones begin with a life. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old, an age when the world is still measured in simple certainties. Christmas meant presents waiting beneath a tree. Snow meant an excuse to leave footprints across the yard. Bedtime stories could still make imaginary monsters disappear by the final page. Tomorrow always felt guaranteed because childhood rarely allows room for the idea that life can end without warning. To those who knew her personally, JonBenét was far more than the image that would later become permanently etched into the public consciousness. Long before newspapers printed glamorous pageant photographs across their front pages, she was simply a little girl with an infectious laugh, endless curiosity, and the boundless energy that often fills a house with both joy and exhaustion. She was the kind of child who asked questions faster than adults could answer them. She enjoyed being noticed, but she also enjoyed ordinary moments that never appeared before cameras. Like countless children her age, she could move effortlessly from pretending to be a princess one moment to sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by toys the next. Her world was built from imagination rather than complexity. That ordinary childhood is sometimes forgotten because of the extraordinary way her story ended. The photographs most people recognize today rarely show scraped knees, messy hair after playing outside, or quiet afternoons spent drawing pictures. Instead, they show carefully prepared pageant portraits filled with sparkling costumes, bright makeup, styled blonde hair, and confident smiles beneath powerful stage lights. Those images became iconic. They also became misleading in one important way. They encouraged millions of strangers to believe they already knew who JonBenét was. In reality, they knew only one carefully presented part of her life. Children who participate in pageants spend only a small fraction of their time on stage. The rest of their lives remain remarkably ordinary. JonBenét attended school, completed classroom activities, played with friends, celebrated birthdays, argued with her older brother from time to time, and enjoyed family holidays just as many 6-year-olds did. Teachers described her as bright, friendly, and eager to participate. She appeared comfortable meeting new people and often displayed the confidence that naturally drew attention in group settings. Confidence, however, should never be mistaken for maturity. She was still a child. She still relied on adults to make decisions for her. She still experienced the world with the innocence unique to early childhood. That innocence stands in heartbreaking contrast to the violence that would later define public memory of her life. Within the Ramsey household, family life followed rhythms familiar to many parents. School mornings required preparation. Evenings involved homework, meals, conversations, and bedtime routines. Holidays became opportunities to create traditions that children might remember years later. Christmas, in particular, occupied a special place within the family. Decorations transformed the house into a festive environment weeks before December 25th arrived. Every room reflected careful planning and enthusiasm. Patsy Ramsey embraced those traditions wholeheartedly. Friends often recalled her determination to make holidays magical for her children. Christmas trees were decorated with care. Seasonal decorations filled hallways and living spaces. Wrap presents accumulated beneath branches glowing with colored lights. The home itself became part of the celebration. For JonBenét, that atmosphere represented normal life. Children rarely recognize extraordinary effort because love often disguises itself as routine. A decorated tree simply appears every December. Presents somehow arrive beneath it. Favorite meals appear on the table. Someone remembers birthdays. Someone tucks blankets around sleeping shoulders. Someone kisses foreheads before turning off bedroom lights. Those gestures seem ordinary until they are no longer possible. Family photographs from the years before 1996 preserve dozens of those quiet moments. Some capture vacations beneath sunny skies. Others freeze birthday celebrations, school activities, and holiday gatherings. Looking through them today feels almost surreal because every smiling face exists without any awareness of what history already holds in waiting. Photographs possess a strange honesty. They preserve expressions. They cannot preserve futures. Every image of JonBenét carries two stories simultaneously. The first belongs to the moment the photograph was taken. The second belongs to everyone who now knows how that story ends. Perhaps no aspect of JonBenét's life has generated more discussion than her participation in child beauty pageants. Even before investigators completed their earliest interviews, television networks began broadcasting footage of her performances repeatedly. Viewers unfamiliar with children's pageants found themselves confronted with images that felt both fascinating and unsettling. Glittering gowns, choreographed routines, polished smiles, and adult-inspired costumes quickly became central to public conversations about the case. Those conversations often drifted away from the investigation itself. Debates emerged about parenting, childhood, competition, and the culture surrounding pageants. Some argued they encouraged confidence, discipline, and performance skills. Others questioned whether such competitions placed inappropriate expectations upon young children. Regardless of those broader debates, one fact remains essential. Participation in pageants does not explain a homicide. It may help explain why the case attracted extraordinary media attention, but it should never be mistaken for evidence regarding what happened inside the Ramsey home. That distinction is crucial. Public fascination with the pageant photograph sometimes overshadowed the far simpler reality that JonBenét was, above all else, a little girl loved by the people around her. Friends remembered birthday parties rather than television appearances. Teachers remembered classroom interactions rather than magazine covers. Neighbors remembered seeing an energetic child rather than a national headline. The world eventually came to know JonBenét through carefully staged photographs. The people closest to her remembered laughter echoing through hallways, conversations around dinner tables, and the ordinary sounds that disappear when a child is suddenly gone. Loss changes the meaning of memory. After tragedy, every ordinary moment acquires extraordinary value. A forgotten drawing becomes priceless. A favorite toy becomes impossible to move. An empty bedroom becomes almost sacred. Parents often speak about how silence itself changes after losing a child. The absence becomes louder than any sound. Although the public would eventually analyze every available image of JonBenét, those closest to her were left with something much more personal. Memories no camera had ever recorded. The sound of her footsteps running down the hallway. The excitement in her voice on Christmas morning. The way she greeted people she loved. The countless little details that never become part of police reports because they belong only to families. Those are the things violence steals most completely. Not simply life, but all the ordinary tomorrows that would have followed. Childhood is often remembered through routines rather than milestones. A favorite breakfast before school. Shoes left carelessly by the front door. A backpack waiting to be unpacked after class. The excitement of losing a tooth. The pride of learning something new without help. These moments rarely seem important while they are happening, yet they become the very memories families hold onto when everything else has changed. JonBennett's life was filled with those ordinary routines. She attended kindergarten at High Peaks Elementary School, where classmates knew her not as a television image or a pageant contestant, but simply as another child sharing crayons, storybooks, and classroom laughter. Like many 6-year-olds, she was learning to read more confidently, discovering new interests, and building friendships that mattered enormously within the small universe of childhood. Teachers remembered a student who enjoyed participating and who generally appeared cheerful and engaged. At an age when personalities begin to emerge more clearly, JonBennett seemed comfortable expressing herself. She was not the kind of child who disappeared quietly into the background. Her confidence, whether in a classroom or on a stage, often made her noticeable, but confidence did not separate her from the ordinary experiences shared by other children. After school, life returned to familiar rhythms. Homework came before play. Dinner brought the family together when schedules allowed. Television programs, toys, books, and conversations filled the evenings. Some afternoons involved dance lessons or pageant preparations, while others were spent doing exactly what children have always done, playing without worrying about tomorrow. That balance between structured activities and ordinary childhood is easy to lose sight of when looking back through the lens of history. Public memory has a tendency to simplify people. JonBennett became the child beauty queen. The phrase is accurate. It is also incomplete. She was a daughter who loved being tucked into bed. A little sister in spirit despite having an older brother. A child excited by holidays. A girl who enjoyed attention but also enjoyed simply being 6 years old. The distinction matters because true crime often risks turning victims into symbols rather than people. Symbols cannot be mourned. People can. Within the Ramsey home, family life reflected both privilege and normality. The family's financial success provided opportunities that many families did not have. Vacations, extracurricular activities, and a spacious home created an environment of comfort. Yet wealth does not eliminate the everyday realities of parenting. Children still become tired after long days. Siblings still disagree over toys. Parents still worry about schedules, school, illnesses, and countless responsibilities that accompany raising young children. Christmas week of 1996 was especially busy. The family had attended social gatherings, exchanged gifts, and made plans for upcoming travel. Like many households during the holidays, the days blended together in a pleasant blur of celebration. Visitors came and went. Phone calls were exchanged. Wrapping paper accumulated faster than it could be thrown away. Excitement lingered in the air as one celebration flowed naturally into the next. For JonBennett, it was simply one of the happiest times of the year. Children experience Christmas differently from adults. They are less concerned with planning and more captivated by wonder. A beautifully decorated tree can feel magical. A new toy can become the center of the universe. The promise of visiting friends or relatives creates anticipation that begins days in advance. There is no reason to imagine danger. Only joy. That innocence gives the final days of JonBennett's life a heartbreaking quality. Nothing suggests she sensed fear. Nothing indicates she believed she was living through her last Christmas. She was making memories, not goodbyes. As investigators later reconstructed her final known day, they found a series of moments that appeared remarkably ordinary. Family celebrations. Time with friends. Returning home after an evening gathering. These details matter because they emphasize how abruptly violence interrupted a life that, only hours earlier, had seemed entirely normal. The transition from celebration to tragedy remains one of the most haunting aspects of this case. There is no gradual descent. No long period of visible crisis. One day ends with holiday festivities. The next begins with an emergency call that will echo through American history. For the people who loved JonBenét, the emotional impact extended far beyond the crime itself. Every familiar routine became a painful reminder of absence. Birthdays continued to arrive. Christmas decorations would eventually be unpacked each year. School terms would begin again. Children in her class would grow older. Life, indifferent to grief, would continue moving forward. Yet one place at the table would remain empty. One bedroom would remain quiet. One future would never unfold. This is perhaps the greatest tragedy behind every homicide involving a child. The loss cannot be measured only by the years already lived. It must also be measured by the decades that will never be lived. The first day of middle school. Learning to drive. Graduation. Friendships still waiting to be formed. Dreams not yet imagined. Every possibility disappears at once. For the public, JonBenét became the face of an unsolved mystery. For her family, she remained the little girl whose laughter had once filled their home. Those two identities would exist side by side from the moment her death became national news. One belonged to history. The other belonged to love. As the investigation unfolded, the world would become consumed by evidence, forensic reports, interviews, theories, and controversy. It would be easy to lose sight of the child at the center of it all. But before there was a case file, there was a life. Before there were investigators, there were parents. Before there was speculation, there was a Christmas celebration shared by a family who believed the next morning would begin like any other holiday morning. Instead, before the sun had fully risen over the snow-covered streets of Boulder, the ordinary rhythm of that family would be shattered forever, and the final hours of JonBenét Ramsey's life would become the starting point of one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of true crime. The tragedy of JonBenét Ramsey is often described through the language of investigation, evidence, suspects, timelines, forensic analysis, and unanswered questions. Those elements are necessary to understand the case, but they can also create distance. They transform a child into a collection of details inside a file. Before she became the center of a national mystery, JonBenét was a person whose world was much smaller and much simpler. Her universe consisted of familiar faces. Her family. Her classmates. Her friends. Her home. The places where she felt comfortable. The people whose voices she recognized. For a 6-year-old child, safety is not an abstract idea. It is the belief that the adults around you will protect you, that tomorrow will arrive, and that the people you love will still be there when you wake up. Children rarely think about the possibility that the ordinary world around them could suddenly become dangerous. JonBenét lived within that innocence. She did not know that strangers would one day analyze photographs of her. She did not know that her name would appear in newspapers around the world. She did not know that decades later, people who had never met her would debate the circumstances of her death. She only knew the world as a child knows it. A place filled with questions, discoveries, celebrations, and imagination. That is the part of her story that can become lost beneath the weight of the investigation. The world remembers the crime. Those who loved her remember the child. The contrast between those two memories is one of the most painful aspects of the case. After her death, images of JonBenét became almost impossible to escape. The same photographs appeared repeatedly on television screens and newspaper covers. In those images, she looked confident and polished, wearing costumes associated with her pageant appearances. To millions of viewers, those photographs became their first introduction to her. But a photograph captures only a fraction of a person's life. It does not show the moments between performances. It does not show the child removing a costume after a competition and returning home. It does not show the quiet afternoons when no one was watching. It does not show the personality that existed beyond the stage. Every person contains countless versions of themselves depending on where they are and who surrounds them. A child performing under bright lights is one version. A child laughing with family at home is another. A child sitting alone with a favorite toy is another. JonBenét contained all of those versions. Reducing her to only one would mean losing the person behind the image. Her participation in beauty pageants became one of the most discussed aspects of her life after her death. The performances, costumes, and photographs generated intense public reactions. Some viewers saw them as evidence of a supportive family encouraging confidence and creativity. Others questioned whether children should participate in competitions that involve adult-style presentation. Those conversations became a major part of the public discussion surrounding the case. But they were conversations about society, parenting, and culture. They were not answers to what happened on December 26, 1996. The danger of public fascination is that it can sometimes shift attention away from the victim and toward the controversy surrounding them. The more famous a case becomes, the easier it is for the individual at its center to disappear beneath the story. JonBenét deserved to be remembered as more than a photograph. More than a headline. More than an unsolved case. She was a child with an entire lifetime ahead of her. A lifetime that ended before she had the opportunity to discover who she might become. At 6 years old, the future is almost entirely unwritten. A child that age has not yet chosen their passions, their friendships, their dreams, or the person they will eventually become. Every possibility remains open. JonBenét might have grown into countless different versions of herself. She might have continued performing. She might have abandoned the stage entirely. She might have discovered a completely different passion. She might have become someone nobody could have predicted. That uncertainty is part of every child's beauty. The future belongs to them. Until it is taken away. For the Ramsey family, memories of JonBenét were not created only during public events. They existed in private moments that strangers would never see. They existed in conversations, jokes, family routines, and the small details that seem insignificant until they become the things people miss most. The sound of a child's voice calling from another room. The movement of small footsteps across a hallway. A question asked at an inconvenient moment. A toy left on the floor. A bedtime routine repeated so many times that it feels permanent. Then, suddenly, it is gone. Grief often focuses on these ordinary details because ordinary life is what has been stolen. People do not only mourn major events that will never happen. They mourn thousands of small moments that will never arrive. A future Christmas morning. A first day of school. A teenage conversation. A birthday celebration. A graduation. A chance to see the person a child would have become. This is why understanding the victim is the foundation of understanding any true crime story. The investigation explains how detectives searched for answers. The evidence explains what investigators discovered. The theories explain what people believe may have happened. But the victim explains why the search for truth matters. JonBenét Ramsey's life lasted only 6 years, but within those years existed everything that makes a person human. Relationships. Experiences. Memories. Personality. Hope. The tragedy is not only that a child died. The tragedy is that the world never discovered the rest of her story. Instead, her name became permanently connected to a mystery. A mystery involving a ransom note, a basement, conflicting theories, and decades of unanswered questions. Yet behind all of those things was a little girl who woke up on Christmas morning excited about presents, who smiled for photographs, who attended school, who played, who laughed, and who believed, as children do, that the world around her was safe. That belief was taken from her. And in the years that followed, millions of people searched for the person responsible. But before searching for a killer, before analyzing evidence, before debating theories, there is one truth that must remain at the center of the story. JonBenét Ramsey was not born a mystery. She was born a child. December the 25th, 1996, ended the way countless Christmas nights had ended before it. Families across America turned off their holiday lights one by one. Children fell asleep surrounded by new toys and wrapping paper. Parents cleaned up the remains of celebrations, placing dishes into sinks and folding blankets left behind by tired guests. The excitement of Christmas slowly gave way to the quiet exhaustion that follows a day filled with laughter. Inside the Ramsey home in Boulder, the holiday appeared to be reaching its natural conclusion. The presents had been opened. The gatherings had ended. The family had returned home. The house, decorated so carefully for Christmas, was settling into darkness. From the outside, there was nothing to suggest that the night would become one of the most studied and debated nights in modern criminal history. There was no warning. No visible sign that something terrible was approaching. No neighbor looking through a window and realizing that a tragedy was unfolding. Just an ordinary winter night. Or at least, that is how it appeared. The final confirmed moments of JonBenét Ramsey's life remain among the most painful and mysterious aspects of the case. Unlike many investigations where a clear timeline can be established through witnesses, cameras, or documented movements, the hours between the family's return home and the discovery the following morning remain filled with uncertainty. That uncertainty is what makes the case so haunting. The last known images of JonBenét show a child who had just experienced Christmas. She had spent the day surrounded by family traditions and holiday excitement. She had no reason to believe that anything unusual was about to happen. She was 6 years old. At that age, children live almost entirely in the present. They do not think about hidden dangers. They do not imagine that familiar places can become frightening. They trust that home means safety. That night, the Ramsey house represented exactly that, a place of comfort after a long holiday celebration. But sometime after returning home, the events that led to JonBenét's death began. The exact sequence remains unknown. Investigators have spent decades attempting to reconstruct those missing hours, examining every possibility and every piece of available evidence. Yet no single timeline has been accepted as definitive. What is known is that JonBenét was found dead inside her own home the following day. What remains unknown is how those final hours unfolded. According to the family's account, JonBenét had fallen asleep during the journey home from the Christmas gathering. She was carried into the house and placed in bed. It was a scene familiar to many parents, a tired child too exhausted to walk, resting peacefully while adults carefully moved around trying not to disturb her. The image is painfully ordinary. That is what makes it so difficult to reconcile with what came later. Somewhere between that moment and the early morning hours, a violent crime occurred. A child who had gone to sleep after Christmas celebrations would not wake up the next morning. The investigation would later reveal that JonBenét suffered a severe blow to the head and was strangled with a homemade ligature. The injuries indicated a violent attack, one that investigators struggled to understand because of the unusual combination of evidence surrounding the case. The method of the crime raised immediate questions. Why was there a ransom note? Why was the body still inside the home? Why had the attacker remained long enough to create a lengthy message? Why did the scene contain elements that seemed to suggest different stories at the same time? Every detail appeared to point in multiple directions. The ransom note suggested kidnapping. The location of the body suggested something else. The condition of the scene suggested both planning and confusion. It was a contradiction from the very beginning. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was the apparent amount of time required for certain actions to occur. The writer of the ransom note did not simply leave behind a brief message. The note contained multiple paragraphs, detailed instructions, and dramatic language. Creating it would have required time, attention, and access to household materials. That raised a question investigators would return to repeatedly. Who would remain inside a house after committing such a crime? A stranger attempting a kidnapping would normally want to leave quickly. Every additional minute inside the home increased the risk of discovery. Yet the ransom note suggested the person responsible had taken time. That contradiction became one of the earliest signs that this investigation would not follow a straightforward path. The crime scene itself offered few easy answers. There were no witnesses who could describe what happened. No neighbor reported seeing someone carrying a child away. No immediate confession appeared. No obvious explanation connected all the evidence into one clear narrative. Instead, investigators faced a collection of fragments. A child's bedroom. A staircase. A handwritten note. A basement room. A family home. A collection of objects that, individually, seemed ordinary but together represented an unimaginable tragedy. The basement would eventually become one of the most important locations in the investigation. It was there that JonBenét was found. A place normally associated with storage and forgotten household items had become the location where police discovered the final evidence of a child's life. The emotional impact of that discovery cannot be separated from the physical evidence. For the investigators entering that home, the case was no longer a missing child investigation. It was a homicide. Every assumption changed instantly. The person they had been searching for was no longer an unknown kidnapper who might still be negotiating for a child's return. They were now searching for someone who had killed a 6-year-old girl. That shift transformed everything. The urgency remained. But the direction changed. Instead of asking where JonBenét had been taken, investigators had to ask what had happened inside the house where she was supposed to be safe. The tragedy of that realization would stay with everyone involved. For the Ramsey family, the place that had represented comfort became the location of unimaginable loss. For detectives, the home became a puzzle. For the public, the case became a mystery. And for JonBenét, those final hours represented the end of a life that had barely begun. The night that began with Christmas lights and family celebration would end with flashing police vehicles, unanswered questions, and a search for truth that continues decades later. Because somewhere between the moment a little girl fell asleep after Christmas and the moment her parents discovered the nightmare waiting for them, something happened inside that house. And that missing story, the story of those final hours, would become the central mystery of the JonBenét Ramsey case. The early morning hours of December 26, 1996, were filled with the kind of silence that exists only after a major holiday. The excitement of Christmas had faded into exhaustion. Across Boulder, families slept peacefully in homes still decorated with lights and ornaments. Streets that had been busy only a day earlier were nearly empty. The world outside the Ramsey residence appeared calm. Inside the house, however, a tragedy had already occurred. The exact moment when the crime began remains unknown. That uncertainty has become one of the most frustrating aspects of the investigation. Detectives were forced to work backward, attempting to reconstruct events from the evidence left behind rather than from eyewitness accounts of what happened. A crime scene tells a story, but it rarely tells the whole story. It leaves fragments. A mark. A movement. An object out of place. A trace that suggests something happened but does not always explain why. In the Ramsey case, those fragments created multiple possible narratives. One interpretation suggested a carefully planned attack. Another suggested chaos and panic. One detail appeared to indicate preparation. Another appeared to suggest improvisation. The challenge was not finding questions. The challenge was finding answers. According to the evidence gathered after the discovery of JonBenét's body, she had suffered a devastating blow to the head. The injury was severe enough to fracture her skull, indicating a significant amount of force had been used. The attack was followed by strangulation with a homemade device, often described as a garrote, created using cord and part of a broken paintbrush. The combination of injuries made the crime particularly disturbing. The violence was not limited to a single action. It involved multiple stages. For investigators, that raised difficult questions about the offender's behavior. Was the attack planned? Did something unexpected happen that escalated? Was the person responsible trying to create a false impression of what had occurred? Understanding the actions of an unknown offender is one of the most challenging parts of criminal investigation. Detectives do not simply examine what happened. They attempt to understand why it happened, because motivation often reveals patterns. But in this case, motivation remained hidden. The ransom note suggested one motive. The physical evidence suggested another. The location of the body suggested another. The contradictions continued to grow. The idea of kidnapping appeared immediately because of the note discovered that morning. A message demanding money naturally directed investigators toward the possibility of an abduction. The language of the letter, however, created more confusion than clarity. It was unusually long. It contained specific instructions. It used dramatic phrases that seemed out of place in a real ransom demand. Rather than sounding like a hurried message from someone attempting to control a dangerous situation, it read to many investigators as something carefully composed. That raised another troubling possibility. Was the ransom note the true purpose of the crime? Or was it a carefully constructed distraction? If it was a deception, what was the writer trying to hide? The uncertainty surrounding the note became one of the defining features of the case. Handwriting experts examined the document. Investigators studied the language. Analysts compared phrases and expressions. Some observers argued that the unusual wording revealed knowledge or familiarity with certain dramatic scenarios. Others believed the significance of the writing could easily be overinterpreted. The note became almost like a second crime scene. Every word was examined. Every sentence was debated. Every phrase became a potential clue. But words, like physical evidence, can be interpreted in different ways. A sentence can reveal intention. Or it can simply reveal imagination. A choice of words can expose a person. Or it can create a false trail. The person who wrote the note, whoever that individual was, left behind something that would continue speaking long after they disappeared. And yet, despite thousands of hours of analysis, the note has never provided a universally accepted answer. Another mystery surrounded the question of time. How long was the offender inside the house? The ransom note alone suggested that the person may have spent a significant amount of time inside the residence. Writing several pages by hand requires patience. Remaining inside an occupied home requires confidence or desperation. The risk involved would have been enormous if family members were awake or if a neighbor noticed suspicious activity. This detail became central to competing theories. Supporters of an intruder theory questioned whether an outsider could have moved through the house, written the note, and committed the crime without being detected. Supporters of theories involving someone familiar with the home pointed to the offender's apparent comfort inside the residence. Neither explanation completely resolved every question. The house itself became a character in the investigation. Large homes contain both openness and isolation. A person can be surrounded by family and still be separated by walls, doors, and distance. Sounds do not always travel predictably. A movement in one area may go unnoticed in another. The Ramsey residence contained multiple levels, numerous rooms, and storage areas that were not part of everyday family activity. The basement, in particular, became a place of intense focus because of where JonBenét was discovered. For the family, it was part of their home. For investigators, it became the final known location of a child's life. That transformation represents one of the cruelest realities of homicide investigations. Ordinary places become permanent reminders of extraordinary pain. A staircase becomes evidence. A bedroom becomes a timeline. A basement becomes a question. A holiday celebration becomes the beginning of a decades-long search for answers. The morning after Christmas was supposed to bring another day of family memories. Instead, it brought emergency calls, police officers, and a wave of questions that no one inside the Ramsey home could immediately answer. The crime had created two separate realities. There was the reality experienced by the family, who woke believing they were beginning another holiday morning. And there was the reality discovered by investigators, who slowly realized they were standing inside the scene of an unsolved murder. Between those two realities existed a gap. A gap filled with uncertainty. A gap that investigators would spend years trying to close. What happened during those final hours? Who entered the home? Who wrote the message on the staircase? Who was responsible for the death of a 6-year-old child? Those questions would follow the case from that morning forward. And as detectives began their work, they would soon discover that the most difficult part of this investigation was not the absence of clues. It was the overwhelming number of clues that seemed to tell different stories at the same time. The final hours of JonBenet Ramsey's life remain one of the most closely examined and deeply debated timelines in modern criminal investigation. More than 2 decades later, investigators, forensic experts, and independent researchers continue to revisit the same narrow window of time, searching for a sequence of events that can explain how a peaceful Christmas night ended with the death of a 6-year-old child. But the night does not reveal itself easily. There are no confirmed eyewitnesses to the crime. No recording of what happened inside the home. No single piece of evidence that reconstructs every movement with absolute certainty. Instead, there is only a collection of details, each one offering a possible glimpse into the darkness that surrounded those final hours. And behind every detail is the same question. What happened after the Ramsey family returned home? According to the family's account, the evening had been ordinary. They had spent Christmas Day visiting friends, celebrating the holiday, and enjoying time away from the house. JonBenet had experienced the excitement that defines Christmas for so many children. She had opened gifts, shared meals, and spent time surrounded by familiar faces. At some point after returning home, she was placed in bed. The house became quiet. The family went to sleep. Or at least, that is the point where the known story ends. The unknown begins in those silent hours. For investigators, the absence of information became one of the greatest challenges. A crime occurring inside a private residence during the night is difficult under any circumstances. The number of potential witnesses is limited. Human memory becomes the primary source of information. Small details that would normally seem meaningless suddenly become critical. A light left on. A door opened. A sound heard briefly. A movement in a hallway. A person awake at an unusual hour. Every possibility mattered. But possibilities are not answers. As investigators examined the case, they attempted to understand the behavior of whoever was responsible. The actions inside the house appeared unusual in several ways. The presence of the ransom note suggested planning. The violence suggested a far more personal and disturbing encounter. The decision to leave JonBenet inside the home contradicted the basic expectation of a kidnapping scenario. The crime appeared to contain competing messages. It was as if the scene was telling 2 different stories at once. One story suggested a stranger. An outsider who entered the home. Someone who had a plan. Someone who wanted investigators to believe a child had been taken. Another story suggested familiarity. Someone who understood the layout of the residence. Someone comfortable enough to remain inside. Someone who knew the family's routines. Neither explanation completely eliminated the other. That uncertainty became the foundation of decades of debate. The concept of an intruder entering the home has remained one of the major theories surrounding the case. Supporters of this possibility point to evidence that they believe suggests the involvement of an unknown person, including unidentified DNA discovered during later testing. They argue that the lack of a clear confession or direct evidence against any family member means investigators should continue considering the possibility of someone from outside the household. However, critics of the intruder theory have raised questions about the practical difficulties involved. They have questioned how an unknown person could enter the home, remain there long enough to write a lengthy ransom note, commit the crime, and leave without being seen or leaving clearer evidence. Those questions do not automatically disprove the theory. But they demonstrate why the case remains unresolved. Every explanation creates another challenge. The possibility that someone inside the home was responsible created a different set of questions. Investigators naturally considered the people who had the closest access to JonBenet because many homicide cases involve someone known to the victim. Family members became subjects of intense scrutiny, and their actions, statements, and relationships were examined in extraordinary detail. The public often struggled with this possibility because it was emotionally difficult to accept. The idea that danger could exist within the place where a child was supposed to be safest was deeply disturbing. But investigators are trained to follow evidence, not emotion. In any homicide investigation, proximity does not equal guilt. Suspicion does not equal proof. A person's relationship to a victim may explain why investigators examine them closely, but it does not establish responsibility. In the Ramsey case, members of the family were investigated extensively. However, no family member was convicted, and no definitive evidence has proven that any member of the Ramsey family committed the crime. That distinction remains essential. The investigation became complicated not only because of the crime itself, but because of how quickly theories formed around it. The public wanted a clear answer. The evidence did not provide one. As the years passed, every new discovery seemed to revive the same unresolved conflict. A new forensic test created hope. A new interpretation created controversy. A new theory gained supporters. Another theory gained critics. The case became a cycle of questions. And at the center of every question remained the same image. A 6-year-old child asleep after Christmas. A child who should have been thinking about toys, family, and the excitement of the holiday season. Instead, her final hours became the subject of countless investigations. That reality gives the case its emotional weight. The mystery is complex because the evidence is complex. But the tragedy is simple. A child died. The search for answers continued because one family lost a daughter, one community lost its sense of security, and investigators inherited a responsibility that has remained unfinished for decades. As morning approached on December 26, the last unknown hours of JonBenet's life ended. The outside world was beginning another day. Neighbors were waking up. Families were returning to normal routines. Christmas decorations still shone from windows across Boulder. But inside the Ramsey home, everything had changed. The silence of the night was replaced by confusion. The uncertainty of sleep was replaced by fear. And the first phone call that would bring police to the house would begin an investigation unlike any other. An investigation where the first clues did not lead toward simple answers. They led toward more questions. And the search for the truth had only just begun. The morning of December 26, 1996, began with a phone call that would change everything. At first, it was not a murder investigation. It was a missing child case. Inside the Ramsey home, the atmosphere was one of panic, confusion, and desperate hope. The family had awakened to a nightmare that, at least in those first moments, still seemed capable of having a different ending. A child was missing. A message had been left behind. Someone, they believed, had taken JonBenet. The possibility that she was still alive shaped every decision that followed. When the emergency call was placed, the words spoken carried the weight of a parent's worst fear. A 6-year-old girl was gone. A ransom note had been discovered. A threat had been made. Time felt like the enemy. In cases involving missing children, the first hours are often considered critical. Every minute matters. Investigators must move quickly, gather information, identify possible suspects, and determine whether the child is in immediate danger. But the Ramsey case presented something unusual from the very beginning. The alleged kidnapper had not taken the child far away. The alleged crime scene was inside the family's own home. And yet, no one knew that at first. The house continued to operate under the assumption that JonBenet had been abducted. The ransom note became the center of attention because it appeared to provide the only explanation for her disappearance. Its words created a terrifying scenario. Someone had entered the family's world, taken their daughter, and demanded money in exchange for her return. The note was found on the staircase leading from the upper floors of the house. It was written on paper belonging to the Ramsey family, using a pen that had also come from inside the residence. Those details would later become some of the most debated elements of the investigation. But in those early hours, the note represented something else. A message. A warning. A possible connection to the person responsible. Every word carried potential importance. The writer appeared to know details about the family, including the exact amount of money demanded. The figure of $118,000 was not an ordinary ransom amount. It was close to the amount of John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus, a detail that investigators would later examine closely. Why that number? Was it a coincidence? Was it chosen by someone with inside knowledge? Or was there another explanation? At that moment, however, those questions had no answers. The priority was finding JonBenét. Police officers arrived at the Ramsey residence expecting to enter a kidnapping scene. They were not walking into what would eventually become a homicide investigation. Their focus was locating a missing child and preserving any information that might lead to her safe return. This distinction became one of the most important factors in understanding what happened next. Crime scenes are preserved differently depending on what investigators believe they're dealing with. A kidnapping scene demands urgency. A homicide scene demands containment. In those first hours, the Ramsey home was treated as a place where a child might have been taken from, not necessarily as the location where she had been killed. That difference would later become the subject of intense criticism. People moved through the house. Friends arrived. Family members gathered. Support was offered. Prayers were said. The home filled with activity during a period when, in hindsight, investigators would have preferred absolute preservation. But hindsight changes everything. At the time, everyone believed they were dealing with a living child who might still be saved. Every person entering the house thought they were helping. No one understood that the scene itself might already contain the answers they were searching for. As the morning continued, the search expanded. Rooms were examined. Questions were asked. The family waited. The ransom deadline mentioned in the note approached and passed. No call came. No instructions arrived. No proof of life was provided. The silence became increasingly disturbing. A kidnapping typically involves communication. The offender wants something. Money. Control. Negotiation. A reason to maintain contact. But the phone remained quiet. The absence of a call created another contradiction. If someone had taken JonBenét, where was she? If the person responsible intended to collect money, why had there been no attempt to continue the plan? The situation began to feel less like a kidnapping and more like something far darker. Still, the possibility that she was hidden somewhere nearby remained. The house was large. There were multiple rooms. There were areas that were rarely used. The search continued. Then came the moment that transformed the entire investigation. John Ramsey and another person began looking through the house again. The details of this moment have been examined repeatedly over the years because it represented the point where the case shifted from a missing child investigation into a murder investigation. They moved through the lower level of the home. The basement. A place filled with storage items, holiday decorations, and belongings that were not part of everyday family life. Basements often become forgotten spaces. They hold things people do not need immediately but cannot bring themselves to throw away. Old boxes. Seasonal decorations. Memories stored away from daily life. In that basement was a small room. Behind the door was the answer no one wanted to find. JonBenét was there. The discovery ended the hope that had guided the entire morning. The child everyone was searching for had not been taken away. She had never left the house. The emotional shift was immediate and devastating. The fear of a kidnapping became the horror of a murder. The family's home, which had been a place of celebration only hours earlier, had become the scene of a violent crime. For investigators, the case changed completely. The question was no longer, where is JonBenét? It became, who did this? The transition between those two questions happened in a single moment. A moment that would define the investigation for decades. The basement room became the center of attention. Every object surrounding JonBenét became significant. The position of her body. The condition of her clothing. The materials used in the attack. The items nearby. The environment itself. Nothing could be ignored. But before investigators could fully understand what they were seeing, something had already happened that would complicate their work. The crime scene had not remained untouched. The house had already been entered and searched. The body had been moved. The environment had changed. Evidence that might once have existed exactly as the offender left it could no longer be guaranteed. The search for answers had begun, but the scene itself had already become part of the mystery. And as investigators looked deeper into the basement and the events of that morning, they would discover that the most difficult question was not simply what evidence existed. It was whether the evidence they found still represented the moment of the crime, or whether the passage of those first chaotic hours had permanently altered the story hidden inside the Ramsey home. 5BA case that had begun with the urgency of a kidnapping became a homicide investigation. The possibility of a frightened child waiting somewhere for rescue disappeared. In its place was the devastating reality that the answer had been inside the home all along. For the officers arriving that morning, the emotional impact was difficult to separate from the professional responsibility now placed on their shoulders. They had entered the house searching for a missing child. They were now standing inside a crime scene involving the death of a 6-year-old girl. The nature of the questions changed immediately. A kidnapping investigation asks where a victim might be. A homicide investigation asks who was responsible. Those are two very different searches. One follows a trail outward. The other begins by examining everything left behind. And in the Ramsey home, almost everything became a potential clue. The basement room where JonBenét was found was not a dramatic location. It was not a hidden underground chamber or a place that looked obviously connected to violence. It was simply a part of the house used for storage, a space filled with ordinary household objects that had suddenly become connected to an extraordinary tragedy. That contrast made the discovery even more disturbing. Violence rarely announces itself through surroundings. A room can look completely ordinary moments before it becomes the center of an investigation. A hallway can hold family photographs and police evidence markers at the same time. A staircase can lead to bedrooms filled with childhood memories and also become the location of one of the most important clues in a criminal case. The Ramsey home became exactly that. A place where everyday life and tragedy existed side by side. As investigators examined the basement, they documented the condition of the area and the items that surrounded JonBenét. The evidence suggested a violent attack had taken place. She had suffered a severe head injury and had been strangled using a homemade ligature created from cord and a broken paintbrush. The details were disturbing not only because of the violence involved, but because they raised questions about the behavior of the person responsible. The use of a homemade device suggested some level of preparation or opportunity. The injury suggested force. The location suggested the offender had access to the house and enough time to carry out multiple actions. Yet other aspects of the scene appeared inconsistent with a simple, planned crime. That contradiction would become one of the defining characteristics of the investigation. The evidence did not create a single clear story. It created competing stories. Investigators are often faced with incomplete information, but the Ramsey case presented a unique challenge. Nearly every major piece of evidence seemed open to multiple interpretations. The ransom note was perhaps the clearest example. If the note was genuine, then someone had entered the house, taken JonBenét, and somehow left her behind. If the note was staged, then the person who wrote it may have been attempting to create a false explanation. The discovery in the basement transformed the note from a kidnapping clue into something much more complicated. It became a possible piece of deception. The question was no longer only what the note said. It was why it existed. Why write a lengthy ransom message? Why demand money? Why create the appearance of an abduction when the child remained inside the home? Those questions followed investigators throughout the case. The physical evidence around the body created additional challenges. Because the scene had not been immediately treated as a homicide scene, investigators had to consider the possibility that some items had been moved or affected before documentation was complete. One of the most significant decisions occurred when John Ramsey carried JonBenét upstairs after finding her. From a human perspective, the action was understandable. A father discovering his child in that condition would naturally want to hold her, move her, and seek help. The instinct to protect a child does not disappear simply because a crime scene exists. But from an investigative perspective, moving a body can alter important evidence. The original position of the victim may contain information. The placement of objects may reveal movement. Trace evidence can be fragile. Small details can matter. A single fiber, footprint, or mark can influence an entire investigation. Once those details are changed, they may never be recovered. This became one of many points debated in the years that followed. Some criticized the handling of the scene. Others argued that the circumstances made mistakes almost inevitable because everyone involved initially believed they were trying to save a missing child. Both realities existed at the same time. A family was experiencing unimaginable trauma. Investigators were trying to respond to a situation that changed faster than they could process it. The result was a crime scene unlike many others. Not because it lacked evidence, but because the evidence existed within a scene that had already been altered. As detectives continued examining the home, they discovered other details that would become central to the investigation. There were questions about possible entry points. Questions about whether an intruder could have entered without leaving obvious signs. Questions about whether certain areas of the house showed signs of disturbance. Questions about household routines and who may have had knowledge of the residents. Every question led somewhere, but few led to certainty. The basement itself became symbolic of the entire case. It represented the hidden truth investigators were trying to uncover. A place beneath the surface. A place containing information that had been there from the beginning but remained difficult to interpret. For the Ramsey family, that basement would forever be connected to the worst moment of their lives. For investigators, it represented the beginning of a long and complicated search. For the public, it became one of the most recognizable locations in true crime history. But beyond all theories and debates, one fact remained constant. A child had died inside her own home. The reason why. The identity of the person responsible. The sequence of events that led to that morning. Those questions remained unanswered. As the investigation expanded beyond the basement, detectives began looking at every possible source of information. They examined the ransom note. They studied the family's timeline. They interviewed people connected to the Ramseys. They searched for signs of an intruder. They analyzed forensic evidence. The house had given them clues, but it had not given them the answer. And the more investigators searched, the more they realized that solving this case would require not only finding evidence, but understanding how all of the conflicting pieces could exist together. Because the Ramsey home did not tell a simple story. It told a story full of contradictions. And those contradictions would become the reason the investigation would continue for decades.